Alright, so let's take a look at some of these signals as we drive around. So as I said, this is the high voltage bus status message, and so it's showing the pack voltage, the pack current. So let's start moving a little bit here. So moving really slowly, we see we're up to 10 amps, and if we give it a good little go, we can see it go up, and then the regen, I didn't actually brake there, I'll do that again. So 2 amps idle, that's for the heating, and then we go up and back down. So that's kind of cool to see that. So this is in the battery management subsystem. So there are a bunch of messages here, some more interesting than others. This one is really cool. It basically shows, I think, the total voltage and the total amperage. If we look at energy status, so it takes a second for the first signal to come in because I have a fairly complicated system for all of this. I'll probably do another video explaining how all of this works. But at any rate, energy status shows the battery. So this is an standard range plus. So I've got the nominal 50.5 kilowatt hour pack, currently at 65% state of charge, which actually translates to 33.5 kilowatt hours. Kind of interesting to see this thing here, the energy buffer. So it's got a 2.3 kilowatt hour buffer, whatever that is. There's lots of speculation that that's a buffer that lives like at the bottom of your battery. So when the UI shows your battery at 0%, you're not actually at 0%, you're still at 2.3. So 2.3 out of 50 is like just under 5%, I guess. So 0 is actually 5%. So I guess that means don't freak out if you're at 0. You still have lots of juice to get to a charger. Drive limits, so it shows a minimum bus voltage, maximum bus voltage, maximum charge current, and maximum discharge current. So that's kind of interesting. So maximum discharge, it has at 800 amps, which presumably multiply that by the voltage, which when the battery is fully charged is around 400 volts. And you get close to the rated power for the car, which I believe is 268 kilowatts for this model. So it's kind of interesting to see. The max charge current will obviously come into play for supercharging. I think the long range versions can charge up to 200 amps, which is why they can charge 150 kilowatts plus, whereas the SR Plus is capped at 100 kilowatts. Well, that's probably related to that. Charger request, there's nothing happening there. This one's kind of interesting. So this one is the total discharge in kilowatt hours and the total charge. So you see the charge is slightly higher than the discharge in my case, which is normal because I'm sitting at 65% state of charge. But what is kind of surprising is this number. Because if we look here at the display, so my all-time consumption, according to the display, is 1,127 kilowatt hours, and the total discharge here is 1,665, almost 66. So there's a fairly large difference there. So I presume that has to do with, when the car's just sitting around and not really doing anything, but still using electricity. And which if this is correct, means that this number is somewhat misleading if you're using it to calculate sort of how much you're paying in electricity. And if you do like me, I've kind of done all the math to see how much this is costing me to operate fuel-wise as compared to my previous gas car. And I've been using this figure of 144 watt hours per kilometer as the figure that I use to multiply by the price of electricity here, which happens to be 6 cents per kilowatt hour, which shows me that this is really, really cheap to run. However, If this discrepancy means that what I'm actually putting into the car is this 1600 figure, that means that my watt hour per kilometer effective is actually much, much higher than what's showing on the display here. And I don't know if this takes into account, probably doesn't take into account also the charging losses. So there's charging losses for me. For example, my wall charger draws 30 amps but only supplies 24 amps. So it's presumably losing some energy there in the conversion. So that also has to be taken into account too when you're looking at how much it's costing you. There's a bunch of other little things here. So they've got these multiplex signals, which you see sort of run between sort of different things. Not quite sure what that is. There are 3 of these things. Here we have AC charger kilowatt total, and each one of these multiplexed items seems to have quite different values, so I'm not too sure what that's about. All the values happen to be the same. There's some issue there. Power available is kind of interesting. So it's showing me max regen power of 56 kilowatts. You can see here on the display there's a little bit of a little dotted line here showing that I don't have max regen. Max discharge power is showing at 248 basically kilowatts. So presumably that as the temperature goes up and down and whatnot, this number changes, and we're going to be looking at that over time. It's kind of interesting. State of charge status, that is showing, not quite sure what min, max versus average means. The UI figure here I thought would be what's displayed, but you see there's a discrepancy here. It's saying that the state of charge for the UI is 66% and it's showing 65%. I'm not too sure what this min and this max is. It doesn't really, it's not 100% certain or something how much charge it actually has. There's a low value and a high value. I don't really know what that's about. It's kind of interesting. It's going to be interesting to explore all these things now that I have access to all this data. And status, just a bunch of stuff here. Preconditioned allowed, update allowed. Just a whole bunch of stuff to look at. Kind of interesting. Thermal status. It's got power dissipation, flow request, cooling targets, sort of the, I guess everything temperature-wise that's related. So lots and lots of stuff in here. There are lots and lots of different categories. I'm just sort of barely scratching the surface right now. It's kind of overwhelming, everything there is to see. This is kind of interesting. Winter's coming. I've been worried about how much energy is going to be used by the heating, the cabin heater. So this here is the PTC heater that's in the car. So it's showing here, interestingly enough, a left and a right current figure for how much energy it's taking. Now let's see if I increase the temperature that I want here. Let's see what that does. The fan has gone down. It's not blowing the fan as hard, but you can see the amps are creeping up. So I guess there's like some sort of ramp up period or something like that, but you can see that now 6 amps on both sides. So that's kind of interesting to see. And I bet you anything that if I go back to the BMS, where's BMS? Battery management system, and I look at the high voltage status, you can see now that I'm drawing 17, 18 amps on the whole battery pack. And you can kind of hear, it's like an electric heater, you can kind of hear the tick, tick, tick. It must be like elements or something that are heating. Let's say bring this back down to what it was, and then you see the pack current instantly back down to an amp. So clearly the heater is quite a significant impact, and it'll be interesting. I'm going to build a display so that I can see these things, as I'm driving, not in this very sort of dense signal viewer format. I think that'll be really interesting to see. What else is really interesting? The drive inverter is really interesting. So for those of you that don't know, the drive inverter is basically the engine. My car just parked. It feels that I'm not doing enough in it. So the drive inverter is basically the thing that supplies power to the motor. It's the intelligence and whatnot. So it's got some really interesting messages here. Chassis control. What's this saying? Yeah, just a bunch of stuff. I kind of wish Dyno did something. It sounds like it would be super cool. But even if I drive, I don't think I get. The dashes here means that I haven't received any signal, any CAN bus message that corresponds to that. So you see here, I'm driving and I'm not getting any of that message. So that's kind of would have been kind of nice, obviously. But there are some really interesting ones here. Let me see if I can find them. Brake temperature. I guess if you're on the track, that could be really interesting. To see how your brake temps go over time. Info is not usually particularly interesting in all of these categories. It tends to be things like software build numbers and whatnot. Location status doesn't seem to give me much anyway. So this is saying the system drive power rate. So it's limiting to 235 kilowatts, and regen, its power is rated to 60, but as we saw, now the dotted line just came back, and it's kind of oscillating between gone and coming back, so that's weird, but I speculate that this is like the absolute maximum, and the other figure that we saw earlier is the what it will let you do. Odometer status, that's just the odometer. Power. So this one is the kind of the fun one. So I would have thought maybe if I drive, so as I drive, this thing is the electric power is kind of jumping around. Yeah, there's something wrong with that. It doesn't really correspond to what I think it should be. Speed kind of works though, so you have vehicle speed here and the UI speed. So the UI speed presumably corresponds to what we see in the UI here, whereas the vehicle speed is the actual speed that it's measuring. But as you can see, it's pretty, as I drive around here, it's pretty darn close. It's basically showing you the same thing. My previous car would, the actual vehicle speed would always be quite a few clicks slower than what was shown on the UI. I don't know if that's to make sure you don't get speeding tickets or what. But here Tesla seems to have calibrated in such a way that it's about the same. System power, so what's that showing? System heat power. Not too sure what all of that does. Also here we have a signal that shows the brake pedal, so I'm actually pressing on the brake pedal right now, so I'll release it. Still says on. I don't know if it's because it's on hold. Let me just, so if I just blip the accelerator pedal there, you see that the pedal state is now off. As far as I can tell, there's no way to see the actual percentage, but there is accelerator position. So accelerator position is 0 here, so now I'm gonna start pressing the accelerator, and you see that the percentage goes up, rather, I should say. And so let me just turn around here, and I'm gonna floor it briefly, and we'll see if it goes to 100%. Alright, so flooring it now. Yeah, there you go, 100%. Cool. So eventually one of the things I want to do is I want to do like a little VBox application that will display kind of a setup for calculating your 0 to 100 time, and I'll be able to, I'll kind of like automatically start the time when I see that the accelerator pedal hits 100, and then calculate with the vehicle speed and a chronometer, be able to calculate very precisely what the 0 to 100 time is. So that should be like a fun little project to do on this. Yeah, what else do we have? Temperatures. Looks like I'm not getting any signal here. Thermal control. Yeah, same thing, no signal here. Torque here is interesting. That would be something that I would display in a sort of performance graph. So if I just sort of move forwards very slowly here, you see 200 newton meters of torque, and they have this notion of command and actual. They seem to follow each other pretty closely. I'm not too sure what that is, but I guess the software probably makes some decisions or something about what it's actually going to let through. So let me try hammering it here a little bit and see you can see the newton meters go up, and interestingly enough, there's on regen there, you saw it goes negative, so it's calculating the rate of deceleration as a torque that's being applied on the motors. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, so there's sort of like the beginning of it. Like I said, there's tons of other stuff to explore in here, and over time I think I'm probably going to be doing that. But in the short term, I think I want to focus on building some fun little apps to have sort of driving aids or driving toys. Not as much as just a sort of a signal viewer here. This is just to get an overall feel for what the car offers and whatnot. So anyway, there you have it. I'm pretty stoked about this. Pretty happy with how it's turned out so far, and yeah, looking forward to doing more stuff with it.